Welcome to Medical Education Principles, Lesson 4, Curriculum Development, Key Principles. This is David Lee Gordon, Professor of Neurology. At the end of this presentation, the participant should be able to explain the importance of institutional support in curriculum development, explain why establishing learning objectives is the optimal first step in developing a curriculum and key to establishing curriculum alignment. Explain why a curriculum should limit learning objectives, assessments, and learning material to core knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behavior. Describe the importance of implementing a standardized, formal, or declared curriculum with universal learner participation. Explain the importance of using different learning and assessment methods based on objective type and competency. Describe how to improve lecture effectiveness. Explain the value of simulation in medical education, and explain the value of assessments as a learning tool. In this talk, we will discuss the key components and principles of curriculum alignment, including institutional support and why it is required for success, curriculum goals and process, why you should begin with the end to ensure success, learning content, to emphasize essential knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behavior that are consistent, core in nature, and standardized. Learning methods, using a blended learning environment that includes lectures, simulation, and other means of learning. And assessments, and how to view them as learning guideposts, talking about assessment domains, formative versus summative assessment, and trainee-specific levels, discussing Miller's pyramid. It is very hard for a course director or program director to be successful without institutional support. The optimal institutional support consists of creating a positive culture of respect and prestige for education and educators, recruiting faculty educators, in other words, mission-based hiring, not just hiring clinicians who can teach, but folks who have expertise in education or a desire to be educators. Identifying and supporting appropriate curriculum champions. Leaders such as deans and chairs and other leaders within institutions should delegate, not relegate, directors of courses and programs with both teaching and leadership skills. It requires both the teaching and leadership skills to be an effective leader of a curriculum. And provide directors and coordinators with sufficient protected time and authority to do their job appropriately. The institution should encourage and incentivize faculty, residents, and fellows to teach and participate in educational committees. The institution should provide teaching education and feedback to faculty and non-faculty educators. The institution should reassign faculty members who are persistently low-performing teachers, despite feedback, to non-educational duties. It is not acceptable to allow clinicians, just because they are senior or important clinicians or important researchers, to continue to teach learners when they are incompetent at doing so and will not take feedback from the course director. The institution should protect didactic sessions from clinical responsibilities. This is a major challenge in clinical medical education. Especially in the residency, the residents are responsible for very important clinical responsibilities, and sometimes fellows as well. But it is essential that there is protected time for their learning. Very important. You can't have a standardized curriculum in which everybody participates if people are constantly disappearing from didactic sessions to go take care of patients. Provide resources, simulation costs, such as standardized patients, skill centers, sufficient instructors to accomplish however the curriculum is designed for small group or lectures or whatever, testing costs, books, electronic tablets, travel, etc. All the things that are important to facilitate the educational process. When developing a curriculum, the very first step is to establish curriculum goals. The curriculum director should begin by envisioning the learner at the end of the course or training period and determine what should learners know, what should their knowledge be at the end of the training period. What should learners be able to do? What should their skills be at the end of the training period? How should learners conduct themselves? What should their attitudes and behavior be at the end of the training period? And to accomplish this, you must start with curriculum learning objectives and include all essential knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behavior. Doing so ensures curriculum alignment and thereby ensures a successful curriculum. That is to say, the learners will achieve successful, essential knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behavior. If you, as a director, determine that that is their goal and you teach to that goal, they will achieve it. And one way this happens, and the way you can ensure it, is to ensure that the formal or declared curriculum covers most, if not all, at least most, of learning objectives. Because the formal curriculum occurs in a controlled environment and it guarantees success. It is dependable. The informal or hidden curriculum, which is in the clinical environment, occurs in a largely uncontrolled environment. And therefore, you should limit the number and type of learning objectives assigned to the informal curriculum to only those possible to achieve in the real-world clinical environment. If it is possible to achieve the learning objectives some other way through a standardized didactic curriculum, that is actually more effective because you can ensure that it will happen. When one develops a curriculum properly, the process ensures success. And this process always starts with the learning objectives. This ensures curriculum alignment and future success. So number one, you start with objectives. And these objectives should be consistent both intramurally and extramurally, core for that learner level that you are teaching in the course, accessible and practical. And the assessments should be based on objectives and based on learning material, both, and practical. The learning material should be based on objectives and aligned with assessments. In other words, teach to the test. If you look at this triangle on the slide, you can see that all these three components, the objectives, assessments, and learning material, are interrelated. You have to ensure that all the objectives are accessible, and you have to ensure all assessments are based on the objectives and learning material. You're teaching to the test. And then you must ensure the learning material is based on the objectives. The learner feels comforted by knowing what they're supposed to know and do, or how to behave, and then knowing they'll be assessed on that specific objective. This is a key component to a successful curriculum. To begin with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey says in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you must first define what a learner must know and be able to do at the end of training to start the whole curriculum development process. It is important that the content of the curriculum be consistent. And what I mean by that is to base all learning objectives on intramural and extramural standards to lessen learner anxiety, validate local culture, and ensure learners are on par with those from other institutions. Intramural consistency includes the competencies or educational program objectives of that institution, the culture of the institution and or the department, communication, cooperation, and support among faculty, course directors, chair, medical education committee, to ensure that, again, the learners aren't faced with hypocrisy in the hidden curriculum especially. And there should be consistency horizontally and vertically, meaning horizontally means across different courses or areas of instruction or clinical sites in the same year, and vertically means across years, from first year to last year of training, for example, or medical school. The declared and hidden curricula should be consistent, as we've discussed in previous lectures. Across learning environment, there should be consistency with the didactics and what goes on clinically, for example. And extramural consistency is important too. In the undergraduate medical education area, there are national specialty organizations that have expectations for medical students, and there's also the USMLE test that gives expectations and topics the students are expected to know. In the GME, graduate medical education area, the ACGME, accrediting body for residencies, and the specific subset of the different residencies, the RRCs, residency review committees, competencies and milestones, help guide what you should be including in your content, as well as the national board exam for that specialty. It is important that the didactic or declared formal curriculum be based on core information. One should base all the learning objectives, assessments, and teaching in the declared curriculum on information and skills essential for a graduating learner to master the core content. A curriculum based on core content facilitates learner confidence, enthusiasm for the topic, flow and skills acquisition, priming for experiential learning, retention of accurate knowledge and skills, and comprehension of supplemental learning. In essence, by providing the core content, you provide the skeleton in that declared curriculum, and this enables a learner to add flesh in the hidden curriculum. This is consistent with Bloom's enrichment or extension activities for learners who have mastered core content. We are not dumbing down the process. We are ensuring that the essential core material is in the curriculum, and that is the only content that will be tested. This does not, again, preclude additional material. And the best learners always want to learn more. And the more they feel confident in the core content, the more likely they're going to add the supplemental material in the first place. And as we have said before, when teaching supplemental material, inform the learners. Inform them when teaching material is not covered on a test, for example, for medical students. When developing a curriculum, the content should be standardized. A curriculum based on mastering core content and deliberate practice requires that all learners receive an equivalent standardized learning experience with universal participation. A standardized declared curriculum is highly structured. Again, requires mandatory participation and punctual attendance. Takes precedence over clinical experiences. This is hard for some folks to figure out. Requires the full attention of learners. Pages and phone should be turned off. Accounts for the majority of the grade, not necessarily learner time. Requires strong, well-organized, well-supported course director, and does not preclude and actually, once again, aids supplemental learning by advanced learners, the so-called enrichment process of Bloom. When developing a curriculum, one should use blended learning strategies. The standardized didactic curriculum is essential, but must not only consist of lectures and multiple choice tests. One should vary the objectives, learning and assessments, based on the specific knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behavior, and competency. On this slide, we have a table of Bloom's taxonomy objective type on the left, corresponding to the ACGME competency, learning methods, and assessment methods. So on the left, we have knowledge is KSAB. Knowledge is an objective type. In the ACGME competency, this corresponds to medical knowledge and patient care. Now, how do you convey this? Well, through lectures or small group sessions or simulation, readings, online material. There are many ways of doing this. And the assessment would be a written test or an oral exam. On the other hand, if the objective type is a skill, this corresponds more to patient care and communication. The learning methods are, well, in the hospital itself, in the clinical environment, the hidden curriculum, or through simulation. And the assessment methods, likewise, are through the clinic or hospital environment, the hidden curriculum or informal curriculum, or simulation. If the objective type is attitude or behavior, the corresponding ACGME competencies are communication, professionalism, systems-based practice, and practice-based learning. The learning methods would be in the clinical arena, again, possibly, which is the hidden curriculum, or simulation, essays, discussions, readings, and again, online material. And the assessment can be done either in the clinical environment or through simulation, essays, and discussions. Lectures, when done right, can be quite effective. Literature determining lectures are ineffective is based on inferior and antiquated lecture styles and implementation. I recommend that you use a white background on your slides in a well-lit room. Most slide presentations now are on TV screens, not projectors. And in TV screens, white is quite effective. Use an engaging style. Walk around. Vary your volume and intonation when speaking. Include anecdotes, storytelling, and case examples to engage the audience. Be interactive. Pause occasionally and ask for input from audience members on topics on the slides, and even include questions within the slides and ask for answers among the audience. Provide a written version of your slides to the learners, often in PDF form is typical, perhaps available online or through email. And since you're going to be using the slides both for the classroom and for reading later as a handout, ensure the slide content is appropriate for both the classroom and later reading. In other words, not too much, which can be a problem in the classroom, or not too little, which gives no information if you're reading it later. You should highlight key words or material to improve audience focus. When there's a lot of information on a slide, the learner has trouble figuring out what to focus on. If you bold and italicize words, as I have done in this slide, or on other slides, I've made certain words red. I use the gray box around important things. These various methods wake up the learner, and they focus on what's important to you. Make sure you only emphasize the important things. And the red, for example, color is even more important than the bold in terms of getting attention. So there's a hierarchy to how you highlight the keywords and material. It would be best if you could record the lecture for future viewing, because the learner process of viewing recordings is very interactive. It includes pausing to rewind, pausing for searching the web. It's quite an interactive process. So to say that lectures per se are not interactive is not really understanding some modern ways of implementing these lectures. The use of simulation in medical curricula is essential. These are guided experiences. The use of simulation results in both effective learning through experiential memory and accurate learning, factual and reasoning memory, guided by instructors. It incorporates deliberate practice 5 essential components, including a motivated and attentive learner, well-defined tasks and goals, appropriate level of difficulty, informative feedback from the instructor, and opportunities for repetition and refinements. It is an effective means of priming learners or preparing learners for patient experiences. And simulation is both a training and assessment tool and links training and assessment seamlessly, and thus is consistent with curriculum alignment. Simulation is especially effective for skills, attitudes, and behavior that one cannot teach and assess in a clinical setting for ethical reasons or due to lack of frequency. For example, in terms of ethical, it's not really ethical to say to a patient, well, ma'am, I'm going to have this medical student to talk to your husband about his brain tumor. Tell him he has a brain tumor. That's not appropriate for a novice to be doing that. But you can do that in a simulated environment and practice your skills on how to break bad news, for example. And there are certain conditions that hardly ever happen, but you need to be aware of them and how to behave when they happen. So thus you can use simulation for lack of frequency events. Here are some examples of simulation, both not in medicine and in medicine. Most skill-based professions routinely use simulation with incorporated deliberate practice, including pilots for a flight simulation. I don't think many of us would want to be on an airplane where a pilot had never had flight simulation for the rare events that might occur, but he or she has not experienced. Athletes practice drills and have exhibition games. The best basketball players in the world, for example, are not the ones who play every day, pick up games on a daily basis. It's the ones who are in a league with coaches who stop and do drills and get feedback, and then watch video of themselves or other players, and then play a game. And then go and have drills and practice and watch videos, and then play a game. That's a deliberate practice cycle using simulation. Actors, musicians, and dancers all have dress rehearsals. They just don't go up and start acting on a play or playing in a concert. They practice first. Dancers all practice. The military has war games, and the police and EMS routinely use simulation drills and exercises. So, as we've tried to express before, practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect, and simulation is a way of having perfect practice. And when I say simulation in medical education, I don't mean just some obvious things like simulators. I mean, for example, case-based learning. In case-based learning, the learner experiences a case that is told to them by an instructor as if they have the experience themselves. It is a form of simulation. Standardized patients, and especially in the setting of objective structured clinical exams or OSCEs, are excellent ways of assessing and teaching and assessing skills, attitudes, and behavior. Oral and written patient presentations of real patients, but not in a clinical environment, is a great way for learners to learn how to communicate. So you don't run the risk of poor communication hurting the patient. In essence, it's a simulation. It may be a real patient they're talking about when they practice their handovers or their presentations in a controlled environment with the instructor or with other learners. But it's safe for the patient because they are practicing their presentations. It's a form of simulation. Anecdotes and storytelling, low fidelity and high fidelity simulators, multimedia, including videos, avatars, etc., role-playing and gaming. These are all useful techniques or methods for utilizing simulation in medical education. Examples of other learning strategies one can use in medical education are small group discussions, readings, either on paper or online, essays, such as reflection on a reading or reflection on an experience or response to a question posed by the instructor. Online material can include videos, PDFs, interactive presentations, and other learning materials. As I've said before, one should match the learning strategy to the objective type and competency. And one should blend the learning strategy to optimize learning. For example, you can assign online material, readings, or essays in preparation for a small group discussion. Let's now discuss assessments, including their value, domains, and types. Now, first of all, as I've said in a previous presentation, assessment drives learning, as George Miller, the pioneer of medical education research, said. And Benjamin Bloom and later folks who embellished on his work, such as Wass and Guskey, said that assessments are learning tools and teaching to the test is optimal. This is how educators view assessments. Assessment's value is that they focus learners on what instructors perceive is important for them to know and be able to do when they complete the curriculum. The assessments are the guideposts. You must view assessments as guideposts, as learning tools. Now, there are three main domains of assessments, and you should ensure the quality in all three. One is validity, and that means, is it appropriate? Are you measuring, something appropriately? For example, you would not ask a medical student to manage a patient, but you might ask a medical student to describe the optimal management of a patient. You might ask a resident to actually manage a patient, perhaps in the clinical environment or perhaps in a simulated environment. Reliability, consistency. Is this assessment, if I give the assessment, somebody else gives the assessment, etc., is it consistent? Feasibility, is it practical? Is it practical to assess somebody this way, or is it not practical based on either their level or based on some other factor? For example, the medical student trying to break bad news in real life as a practice that's not feasible. So it's important that all your assessments be valid, reliable, and feasible. And there are two main types of assessments, and you should utilize both in the declared curriculum. And they are formative assessment, which is feedback, and summative assessment, which is graded. Formative assessments consist of feedback and are low stakes. They are an intermediate gauge of a learner's progress. And you may assess both core content and supplemental content with this type of assessment. You should perform formative assessments both spontaneously as part of the experiential learning or clinical experience and proactively within the declared curriculum. Summative assessment are graded high-stakes assessments. They are an outcome measure of a learner's knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behavior acquisition. Only assess core content with summative assessment based on learning objectives and standardized learning. In other words, honor curriculum alignment. And only use, for medical students, we don't use grading so much for the residents and fellows, but for medical students, use criterion referenced, not norm referenced grading. We'll discuss this in more detail in the next presentation on undergraduate medical education challenges. Assessment should vary with trainee level, and this was described well by Miller in his pyramid of clinical assessment. And in fact, it parallels Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow discussed in a previous presentation. So Miller published this originally in 1990, this pyramid with noses on the bottom, then knows how, then shows how, then does, making clear that the novice is at the bottom of the pyramid. The novice has to know, and the advanced has to do. And when you then look at the assessment types to go with it, to assess knowledge, you use factual tests, such as multiple choice tests, essays, and oral exams. To assess if someone knows how, you use tests also, clinical, but they're clinical context-based tests, case-based tests with multiple choice questions, essays, and oral. Slightly different. The shows how has to be done in simulation, a performance assessment in vitro using OSCE or standardized patient, simulator, or case-based test. And does is with real patients. This is performance assessment in vivo, observation, undercover standardized patient or video, logs, these kinds of things to make sure that the learner is actually doing something for real. Clearly, the advanced person must demonstrate all these things, but the novice, for example, may just be at the nose level or the knows how level, and at the most, a shows how level. This concludes Medical Education Principles Lesson 4, Curriculum Development. After viewing this presentation, I hope you are able to explain the importance of institutional support in curriculum development. I hope you're able to explain why establishing learning objectives is the optimal first step in developing a curriculum and key to establishing a curriculum alignment. Explain why a curriculum should limit learning objectives, assessments, and learning material to core knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behavior. Describe the importance of implementing a standardized, formal, declared curriculum with universal learner participation. Explain the importance of using different learning and assessment methods based on objective type and competency. Describe how to improve lecture effectiveness. Explain the value of simulation in medical education. And explain the value of assessments as a learning tool. Thank you for viewing and listening to this presentation. This is a DLG Insight production. Innovative neuroscience ideas and thoughts on education.